Good morning. Good morning. I hope you're having a good day so far. This networking breakfast is one of the series of networking breakfasts that falls under the umbrella of the AUC Annual Fund Program. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Lubna Faiz, and I was double majoring in okay. I was double majoring in communication and media arts and political science. I was also part of the AUC swimming team. I'm here to walk you through my journey at AUC. Okay, let me begin. I'm a recent graduate. I just graduated in June. AUC, I really love and appreciate every moment I've spent here at AUC. Each moment in my 4-year journey have helped who I am and with the way I think, and helped me develop the person I am today. Not only that, but AUC creates a highly motivating platform for students to excel, ranging from the different facilities that AUC offers, such as the sports complex and the AUC pool, to the diversified community that we have, ranging from the professors and students. I thought of how big AUC has benefited me and helped me conquer a lot of potential within me. And for that, I personally donated to the personal class gift and the AUC President Challenge. I was a receiver of the emergency grant and the financial aid, and I thank all the contributors for helping me to continue this beautiful journey. Let me leave the floor for John Al-Muqaddam. Our talk today is about unlocking our potential in business, life, and health. He's the director of coaching and development for Rector and the founder of Breakthrough.Coaching. Mainly, it's a new understanding of how the mind works, and it's a breakthrough in thinking and results driven more than the casual life coaching we hear about. So welcome me to join me in welcoming John Al-Muqaddam.
Thank you very much, Lubna, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here as well. I'm a little shocked because we're in Egypt and I was told we were going to start at 12 o'clock and it's 10 to 12, so things are changing here already by the looks of it, so that's good to hear. So thank you all for being here. As Lubna said, my name's John Al-Muqaddam, and I'm a breakthrough coach. Now, you've probably heard a lot about sort of life coaching. This is a bit different. And today what I want to do is to give you a bit of a feel for what the difference is. Is that better? Ooh, that's really loud. So I want to give you a bit of a feel today about what the difference is between life coaching and breakthrough coaching. I can't guarantee that you're going to walk away with some kind of massive breakthrough today. We have 1 hour. But what I'm hoping for is that you go away a little bit curious about where the quiet is. And we'll be talking a lot today about the quiet and where it is, what it looks like, and why it's important. So just keep your radar open for that. Don't kind of look for it, but just be open to it. So you might be wondering, so how does breakthrough coaching work? And what sort of results do we get? Well, I work with people over typically quite a short space of time. So I'm not looking to work with people over a long period of time. For me, it's kind of short and sharp and looking to get results with people. It's not tools and techniques based. It's very understanding based. And the kind of results that we get are, they range from breakthroughs in business, people turning around their business, to I've recently completed a study in the UK where I worked with people who have chronic fatigue syndrome. And we conducted an 8-week study with 2 control groups. And we saw people who had been ill for 20, 30 years make full recoveries. I've also seen people with autoimmune issues, fibromyalgia, migraines, that sort of thing, completely turn around after short interventions and just usually conversations. Not tools and techniques, but just conversations. But they're conversations that look in a very specific direction. And to give you an analogy of how it works, it's kind of like this. Imagine you've been given a new kids board game. I know we're all used to playing games on phones, but go back in time and remember the days when we played games on boards. And you open the box, and you take out the board, and you take out the pieces, and there's no instructions in the game. So you're looking at all of these things, and you're thinking, what do I do with these pieces? And how does what do I do with the dice? And where do I put them all? Well, that's what this is. I'm sharing with people how life works, how the mind works, how creativity works, how problem solving works, what resilience looks like, what well-being is. And as people start to see what's actually true about these things, it leads them to having insight. And insight is the engine of change. So the more people have a deeper understanding of how these things work, they start to see it differently, and they operate differently as a byproduct of that understanding. Not because they're using a tool, not because they're using a technique. If I give you another analogy, it's like gravity. You don't think about gravity or how to harness gravity. You know how it works. So because you know how it works, you operate your life from that understanding. So that's how this works. We look at how these things work. And as you start to see how these things work, it starts to create the insight that brings breakthrough, that brings transformation. So that's the kind of what. Now, how I want to talk about it today is I want to give you a little taste of how I might work with a client. So typically clients come with challenges, and when they come with those challenges, we take them out of the detail of the challenges and we look at how these things work. So what I want to do today is share some stories with you about what we see is behind the human potential. And it turns out that it's a very simple misunderstanding that's at play. And the more we start to correct those misunderstandings and see truth, the more people start to find these breakthroughs in all of these things that you see here. So we'll start with some stories, and we'll look at what's behind those stories. And then if we've got questions at the end, I'm happy to field all of those and take them. Does that sound like a good plan? All good? Okay. So some of you may know, if you read my bio, that I started my career as an IT consultant. So it's quite a change to go from IT consultancy to coaching. As it turned out, I learned quite a lot about the human potential when I worked as an IT consultant. And it was accidental. So one day I was working on a very large project. I worked for a company called Accenture at the time. And we were working on a large-scale software implementation that involved a lot of different systems with different dependencies. So they all interlinked with one another. And one day, I had a free afternoon. It didn't happen very often, but it happened that day. And my boss said to me, would I go and lend a hand with a project that was struggling? And they had a performance issue with the system that they were implementing. And my first thought was, when he asked me to do it, what am I going to do to help these people? You know, these were bright, intelligent people who, they knew their stuff. And I've been asked to lend a hand, and I'm thinking, well, why am I going to contribute anything useful? Now, I went along, and I went to see these guys. And I was struck at how in their head these people really were. They were so busy in their mind. You know, this system that they were implementing was at the core of everything that we were putting in for this client. So if it didn't work, nothing worked. So they were worried about what the client was going to say. They were worried about budgets. And then they had their personal worries. What am I going to do if I lose my job? You know, how am I going to pay the mortgage? This was where I found these people. and they weren't finding any solutions. Now, I walked in, bearing in mind I knew less than them, and what was the worst that was going to happen if I didn't manage to solve the problem? I was going to go back to my job the next day, so I had nothing on it. So I walked in and I was playful. I was just genuinely curious about what they were doing, and I was exploring. And I think there was no one more surprised than me that day that I managed to be the one that came up with the solution to this problem. I was like, how does that work? How is it that I can know less than these really bright people, and yet I can be the one that actually solves this problem? What's behind all of that? And I don't know if any of you relate, but have you ever had the kind of situation where you've had a problem and then you just think, I give up, right? And then one day you're out for a walk, or you're in the shower, or you're on the toilet or whatever, and suddenly you get an idea. And you go, okay, that's what I'll do about this. Well, that was the space I was accidentally in that day, and they weren't. They had so much going on in their minds, they couldn't see anything new. Now, that space I was in was a space of what I would call well-being. It was a natural space of creativity, and it was a space of quiet. Now, most of us aren't in that space, and you're probably thinking, okay, so what lets us be in that quiet more? We'll get there. For now, what I want you to see is that actually underpinning so many of these things we look for is just knowing we're okay, knowing we're safe, knowing we're resilient. And if you think about those guys that day, on that IT project, they really didn't know they were okay. It really looked to them like if they didn't solve this problem, their life was finished, or their job was finished, or it was all going down the pan. Right? They didn't see something fundamental about their resilience. So where is all of that? And what's behind it all? And what does it look like, that resilience, to be in it more? Well, I had an experience of it myself when I'd moved from IT consultancy. And I was, at the time, I was involved in a lot of tools and technique-based coaching. So I did NLP, and I used to do lots of visualizations and state management and all of this kind of stuff to put myself in a peak state. I can't even say it now, but I used to do it a lot. I'd rev myself up. And I remember I used to do these kind of trainings, and I would get horribly nervous, like dripping sweat, running to the bathroom, kind of panic nervous whenever I had to talk to anybody. You would not have seen me dead doing something like this, like I'm doing today. I couldn't have done it. And I had to do these trainings, and so I would use all these tools and techniques that I'd learned to try and put myself in a place where my anxiety was not there anymore. And I sort of managed, kind of. But I was a really horrible trainer. I was really bad. I was not present at all to the people in the room. I was not in a creative space whatsoever, and my head was so busy managing all these tools and techniques that I was barely even looking at the material that I had to teach. So what happened? I was at a seminar for a well-known personal development teacher in the US, and he teaches a lot about managing state, managing how we are. And I was at this event, and I was just innocently going and talking to some of the trainers and asking them how they were. An innocent enough question. And the reply that I got back from every single trainer was the same. And they all said to me, "We're outstanding." I'm like, God, who says that? I've never said I'm outstanding when someone asks me how I was. But the thing that really struck me was that there was one guy who said this to me, and he was clearly really annoyed about something. So he's telling me on the one hand he's outstanding, but you know when you just know that someone's not quite telling you the truth? Well, that was what happened that day. He was telling me he was outstanding, but I was going, no, you're not in that place. Well, that day I had an insight. And my insight was, gosh, in the same way I can tell this guy is annoyed. Everybody who comes to one of my trainings probably knows I'm an anxious, nervous wreck, trying to not be an anxious, nervous wreck. So maybe I should just give up trying, since they can tell anyway. So the next time I went back to do one of these trainings, I abandoned all the tools and techniques. I was like, you know what? I'm nervous. It's fine. It's human. Whatever. And you know what? It was the first time I didn't find myself on the verge of panic. It was the first time I didn't find myself running to the bathroom. And it was the first time I was actually a really good trainer. But I was still really anxious a lot of the time. I just stopped caring about it. I'd stopped thinking it was somehow a problem for me to be human. And I'd let go of it being an issue. Now in that space, I was quiet. But I was quiet with myself. So I wasn't quiet in the sense of, oh, I'm all blessed and zenned out. No, I was quiet with my humanness. I was no longer in resistance to myself. Right? So very often we put pressure on ourselves that we need to be different to how we are. Well, that's a battle you'll lose. You're fighting the universe when you do that. You know, it's just going to end in struggle. And it doesn't make you better at what you do. It's okay to be human. Now, you might think, well, what is it, again, that lets people drop this resistance to themselves and enter that quiet more and more and more? You know, you might start to think, well, is that a technique? Well, for me, it's not. For me, it's about waking up to the fact that we are, at our core, always fine. Always fine. Sometimes we might have an experience of not being fine, but that's different from whether we actually are fine or not. And there's a story that I like to tell that comes from one of my mentors. Her name is Mara Gleason. And she wrote a book called One Thought Changes Everything. And she shares a story in that book about her experience of finding safety in the midst of what looks like a very unsafe situation. And when she was in her student days, she decided that she wanted to go and study abroad so that she could learn Spanish. And she said to her parents, I'm going to move to Buenos Aires because I want to go study there. And her parents were like, no, don't do that. Go to Dublin, it's safe there. And she's like, no, she's quite strong-minded. And she said, no, I'm going to Buenos Aires. So she goes there. And one night she's out with her girlfriends and they're doing what students do. They're going out to party. And they're crossing between two streets. And they find themselves walking in this alleyway. And she was slightly in front of some of her friends. And all of a sudden, a motorbike comes down the alleyway. And this guy with a helmet gets off and grabs her arm. And she's like, this is not going to go somewhere good. Now her friends run off. So she's now left in this alleyway with this guy. And he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a gun. And he puts it to her head. And she's like, what followed was so strange to her. Because she said, all of a sudden, I was suddenly fine. Said, in the midst of having a gun to my head, I had no reference for what was happening. And suddenly I got really quiet and I knew I was fine. And she said it was so profound that I even looked at the gunman and I could sense that he sensed it too. And she said there was such a sense of safety that came over me that I actually grabbed his arm gently and said, "You're really scared, aren't you?" And he just looked at her. And she lifted his arm off of her and she walked off. And she never saw him again. Now she said what was strange, even stranger than that, was she then caught up with her girlfriends. She wasn't even annoyed with them, which you might think she might be given they ran off. But she wasn't annoyed with them because she'd had that experience. And she said, but what was really interesting was she got to the bar and all of a sudden she was scared. And, you know, she was like, what were you doing? Why didn't you just give him your handbag and your watch and all, you know, money and all of that sort of stuff? And she said, oh my God, hang on a minute. I don't have a gun to my head and I'm scared. And yet a minute ago, I had a gun to my head and I was fine. What's with that? Well, what's with that is that we don't live in a reality that is created by circumstance. We don't feel our circumstances. We feel our thinking moment to moment to moment. And our safety is something that is there before we get lost in the noise of thought. Right? It's that spiritual connection, that sense of oneness that exists between all of us when we aren't lost in me, my life, where I've got to get to, what do I do for my career, how do I grow my business, and all of that noise that's just going on perpetually. Right? That noise is the thing that gives you your experience. It gives you your feelings. But the good thing is that it's not information. So what you feel moment to moment to moment is just a function of that, but there's no useful data in there about what to do with it. Right? It sorts itself out. And that's the other aspect of resilience, is that when you realize that you don't live in a circumstance-created reality, you live in a thought-created reality, well, you can start to observe how the mind works. And the mind works in a transient way. Right? You can observe it in children. Right? Children go from hating you one minute to loving you and wanting you to play a video game with them the next. Right? They've got nothing on how they feel. They don't resist it. So they ebb and flow with the flow of thought as it comes through them. Right? Now, I remember seeing that resilience with my daughter. You know, she can throw, she's called Layla, and she can throw the most ridiculous tantrums. So much so that she used to make her nose bleed. And you can imagine, as a parent, that didn't look very good to me. And we're like, God, we must be the worst parents on earth. Our daughter gets so upset she makes her nose bleed. So you can imagine when she would throw one of these tantrums, we would try and fix it. Right? We try and calm her down. We try and make her not be angry. Well, where do you think that went? She got even more angry and even more annoyed. And it would get worse. And we're like, oh my God, we really are rubbish parents. Now, I took this particular dilemma to my coach, a chap called Michael. And I said to him, I said, look, what the heck do I do about my daughter? And he said, well, John, you do know that her behavior's got nothing to do with you, don't you? And I was like, no, I don't think I see that actually, but okay. And I didn't really even know what to do with it. But I remember just leaving that day, having spoken to him. I was just like, oh well, let's see what happens. I often used to have conversations with him like that, to be honest, where he would say something to me, I wouldn't readily understand it, and then I would see something about it later on. This was one of those occasions. So he said this to me, didn't mean anything to me at the time, but the next time Layla threw one of these tantrums. I came downstairs and I found Linda, my wife, having one of these situations with Layla. Linda was in tears and Layla was doing what she does, throwing things and going crazy. Well, for the first time I actually saw what he meant. Every time she had done that in the past, I had made it her behavior about me as a parent. Actually, it was nothing to do with me as a parent. She was having angry thinking in the moment. And I was resisting that and telling her it was wrong, which was then making her even busier up here. It was like, oh, you're angry and you shouldn't be. Oh, well, now she's even angrier. Well, that day, because I actually saw that it had nothing to do with me, I didn't feel the need to do anything about it. So all I did was pick her up, and I took her up to her bedroom, and I sat with her. And she was storming around and throwing things in her bedroom, and she even tried to hit me. That was the one thing I stopped her from doing. But everything else, I just let her do what she did. And after 20 minutes, she just settled down, and she sat on her bed and went quiet. And I went downstairs and I got her a tissue and a glass of water. And then when I came upstairs, the door was shut. I was like, uh-oh. So I knocked on the door. And this really quiet voice said, wait a minute. So I was like, okay. She then opens the door, and I see that she's tidied her room. She then comes out and gives me a hug and says sorry. And then goes downstairs and does the same with Linda. And I'm sitting there going, did I ask her to tidy her room? Did I ask her to say sorry? Did I do anything? I didn't do anything. And I realized that was the first day I'd actually really loved her. As she was. I'd not made it about me. I'd actually just let her be as she was. And because of that, her mind had settled all on its own. Because that's what it's designed to do. Right? So when you think about creating change with other people, a lot of it, in fact, I was talking with somebody this morning about this, it's not so much about your qualifications. It is a lot to do with where you come from. And I remember, my coach saying to me, if you don't love your clients, you can't help them. And you can only love your clients, I can only love my clients if I see their health. And I can only see their health to the extent to which I see it in myself. Right? So a lot of that seeing health is to do with seeing my own resilience, seeing my own well-being, seeing where the quiet is in me, is seeing how creativity works through me. And the more I see that for myself, the more I can direct other people to that. And the less the challenge they bring to me looks like a problem. Now, another thing that comes to mind, I know we've talked about sort of unlocking our potential in business life and health. Health is another one. What's being quiet and dropping our resistance to ourselves got to do with being healthy? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot, as I found out from my own experience. So I mentioned at the beginning that I worked with a lot of people with health issues, particularly with chronic fatigue. Well, the reason I can do that is because it was something I suffered from. So in 2007, I got ill with this kind of virus. And it really hit me hard. I was hospitalized for 3 months. And I basically spent 7 years trying to regain a level of function. And I sort of did. But I was still very symptomatic right up until 2014. And in 2014, I happened to be doing this apprenticeship with my coach. And I had I had ongoing issues with fatigue. But I also had problems with heat and sunlight. So I couldn't go out in the heat. I couldn't be in sunlight for more than a few moments. Because if I did, I'd start feeling sunburned. I'd start getting really dizzy and nauseous, and getting terrible headaches. So I went to my coach and I asked him about it. And I said, what do you make of this? I've had every test under the sun. They can't find anything wrong with me. What do you think? And he said, his first answer was, maybe you're a vampire. And I kind of laughed because I can't stand the sight of blood at the best of times. So I said, no, I think we can rule that one out. And his next answer was, well, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. And I think my answer to him at the time was I swore, because I was like, it seemed to me that he was suggesting I was making up the symptom. And it really didn't feel made up to me. It felt very real, as all my symptoms had. And I went away that day and I was like, what on earth was he on about? Another one of those, what was he on about things? But something in me had been twigged, and I got curious when he said it. And I went and saw a functional medicine practitioner in the UK. And again, I had the book thrown at me. Every test under the sun. Could not find any diagnosable illness that would be causing me to have the symptoms that I was having. But what was interesting was there were a couple of results that were elevated. Now, one of those results was my cortisol level was through the roof, and my other hormones were on the floor. And I asked the doctor about it. I said, well, what is cortisol? And he said, well, cortisol is your stress hormone, and it triggers your fight or flight response. So when there's danger, when there's the perception of danger, your body secretes cortisol and other stress hormones so you can get away from danger. I was like, okay, why are my other hormones on the floor then? And he said to me, well, the building blocks of your other hormones and cortisol are the same. So when your cortisol levels are high, your other hormones tend to drop because the body prioritizes making cortisol because you need it to survive. I'm like, okay, so that explains the tiredness. So the question then became, well, what am I stressed about? Why are these cortisol levels so high? And he also said to me, do you know how much energy it takes for you to be this tired? And I was like, hang on a minute, that means I have energy and I'm using it to create tiredness. How does that work? Anyway, I left that doctor's office that day and I was like, hang on a minute, so where is the stress? If I live in an inside-out reality and it isn't circumstances that create my feeling, then it's me. And I suddenly realized where the stress was. I used to spend hours upon hours going round and round and round in my head, worrying about the effects of if I went out in the sun, worrying how I was going to cope if X, Y, and Z happened, worrying about how to navigate my life. I had put me at the center of managing my life, and I was making myself sick in the process. I had put myself in the place of managing my energy. How ridiculous is that? That's like trying to manage your digestion. Can you imagine eating something and then going, oh right, okay, I've eaten an apple, so let me secrete stomach acids and enzymes that's going to make... You can't do that. And you don't need to do that. There's something behind life that does that. That's that self that I had, that I touched occasionally in my life, but that's the self that Mara had touched that moment with the gun to her head. Actually, that space is the space that is living life, living through us. There is a fundamental intelligence there that brings insight into our minds, brings creativity to us, breathes our body, beats our heart, works our immune system, helps us solve problems. It's also the space where we're connected to one another. Right? So when we're feeling disconnected from other people, it's not that we're actually disconnected. It's that we've got a lot of thinking in our mind that creates the illusion of disconnection. But actually, again, if we know that that disconnection is something that's transient and created in our mind, then we know it doesn't last long. So it's like when I got this understanding and realized how my mind was working, I hoped it was going to stop me arguing with my wife, who's over there. It didn't. We still have arguments. But the funny thing is we know we're not arguing with each other. We know we're only arguing with our mind's perception in the moment. So you can have that argument, but you know pretty soon it's going to change. And you also know, if you're having that disagreement, that it's not information about your relationship. It's just information about thought in the moment. So that's why it is that I'm able to share an understanding with people, and it can create wide-ranging effects across the board. You see, underneath it all, whatever challenge anybody's having, you know, whether it's career, business, relationships, health, you name it, whatever it is, it's actually another problem in disguise. And the actual problem that it is that they're looking to know that they're okay. And they think that being okay has got something to do with solving those problems. It doesn't. Right? Because that okayness is built in. It's not lost. It looks lost. But the extent of it being lost is the extent to which the sun is lost on a cloudy day. Right? You don't go outside on a cloudy day and go, oh my God, the sun is gone. How do I find it? No. You know it's still there. And you know the nature of the clouds is to clear. You don't do anything to clear them. They clear themselves. It would be pretty messy if you tried to clear them. Well, that's what it's like when you try to clear your mind. You actually stir it up more. You actually get more lost in thought. You drive yourself crazy like my daughter. Right? Oh, I'm really upset, up in my head, and I really shouldn't be up in my head. What do I do about it? Well, that just makes you really busy. So we're not designed to live in the quiet all the time, because we're human. Right? We do get lost in our head sometimes. But if you know where your safety is, and you know that your resilience is built into you, and you know that anytime you're not feeling it, all that's going on is your mind is cloudy with thought, well, you don't need to do anything about it anymore, because pretty soon that's going to clear anyway, and you'll come back home. Now, I wonder what difference it would have made to those IT consultants if I'd have known that when I was working all those years ago. You know, if I could have helped them see that actually their resilience was nothing to do with whether they solved the problem. Whether I could show them that actually, you know what, when they realized they were okay and that whenever they weren't feeling it, that was temporary, they would get access to this creative intelligence that would come through them and help them solve the problem. Right, well, that's a lot of what I do now. I sit with clients and I help them see this one fundamental truth, that we are okay. And how the mind works is that sometimes it creates an illusion that we're not. But if you know that it's just a very real illusion, then it's like watching an action movie on the TV. Right? You sit and watch an action movie and you feel everything that's going on with the characters, but you don't run behind the sofa. You don't try and find a strategy to feel better. You know it's just a movie. Well, that's all you're ever watching that's going on up here. And the bit that's watching it is the bit that's safe, always. It's the bit that's connected to that deeper intelligence. That's why you don't need to struggle to find it. It reveals itself, all on its own, when you stop trying. And when you know it's there, you unlock the potential for all of these things, organically. Not because you're doing a tool or a technique, but because that's how we're built. It's the default position. But we're full of noise telling us that it's not. And that makes us really busy. Is that 45 minutes? So maybe that would be a good place to stop for a minute and see if you've got any questions you want to ask. Or anything you want to share that's come up. Or if you've noticed yourself get quiet at all, even if for a fleeting moment today. Yeah.
It's not real. The reality is different.
I don't know if it's working. Okay.
But there are a few things that you mentioned in your talk that I need to like sometimes when you worry, again that's important for your decision making, and think of different scenarios how to solve the problem. So there is some form of an overlap between the fear and thinking of a solution. So how can you manage that? So yeah, you need to stop worrying, but you need as well to be afraid to think of the scenarios and different approaches to solve the problem. So fear is important. Again, this is some form of work in psychology. They know that fear is important. Block the fear here, that it can cause other problems as well.
Yeah. So there's a few things that I would say about that. It looks different to me that fear is important to decision making. It actually looks the opposite. And the reason I can say that is because for me, fear is me going round and round in my head, in what's already been formed in my head, hoping I'm going to see something new that's going to help me solve whatever problem's in front of me. Well, that's thinking inside of a box. And we all have heard the phrase thinking outside of the box. Well, how does that work? The way we talk about it in culture generally is that is something that we have to do. Right, I need to solve this problem. Let me think outside of the box. And it becomes a practice. It doesn't work that way in my experience. For me, thinking outside of the box is something that occurs organically. And it occurs organically when people can really realize that they're fine. That they're, even if they don't solve a problem, they're okay. I'll give you a good example of it. One of my colleagues used to work for one of the aerospace companies and was responsible for one of the big fighter programs. And he was responsible for ensuring the electronics for that plane was built correctly. One day he gets a call from the military, and they say to him, "Hey, you know how we said that you needed to do this project in 18 months? Actually, you've got 6. Off you go." And he was like, "Oh, okay, 6 months, right. How are we going to do this?" And he watched as his engineers tried to figure out how they were going to do this. And they were getting really, really worried about it. And it got to the day before the deadline, and they hadn't come up with a solution. And so he called his team together, and he said, "Right, guys, you've done your best, and tomorrow I'm going to take the hit. I'm going to call up the general. I'm going to tell him that we can't do it, and we're out." And he said, "Thanks for all that you've done." Next morning comes, and he gets a call, and it's one of his guys, and he said, his name was Don, and he said, "Don, would you come to the office with something we want to show you?" So he's like, "Okay." So he shows up at the office at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and there are a whole bundle of cars there, which was unusual because he was normally the first person in the office. He's like, "Why are all these people here?" So he walks in, and one of his guys said to him, he said, "Hey, Don, you know when you told us we were out?" He said, "We were so relieved. And we went home, played with our kids, and just stopped thinking about the problem for a while." And he said, "You know what? Suddenly, whilst I was doing something completely different, I just had an idea. And I called up, I don't know what his name was, Bob, Jerry, something like that. And he said, we figured it out. we know how to do it. And he showed Don what they'd come up with, and they solved the problem. They took it from 18 months to 6. Now, they only did it when they gave up. And it was not, so the misunderstanding I heard in what you said is that fear somehow is going to make me make a better decision. No. Fear is going to take you round and around in what's already been formed. It's going to disconnect you from the source of new thought. And that is not what solves problems, that. It's when we can see, actually, you know what, whether or not we solve a problem, we're fine.
Sometimes I solve the problem, or I put it as a priority. Yeah, it sometimes doesn't need a creative solution. It's straightforward solution, so you need to resolve it very quickly now. Yeah, but again, for other solutions that need creativity, definitely your mind has to be in a state of relaxation to be able to deliver. Otherwise, it blocks.
You can't see it.
Of course, it helps, yes.
I think the
Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. One here, and then I'll go there.
building on her point, I think the concern is there's a thin line between wanting to succeed or wanting to do something better or aspiring for succeeding, for example, in this in making the 60 months, versus being okay and indifferent about things. So how do you? It's a very thin line. I'm trying to even think with my children, for example. If you shall you push them to become better or settle for? So it's a thin line of just accepting being okay or accepting being average. This is where the fear part that she's talking about, because she's anxious in trying to solve the problem. She's anxious in trying to succeed in this or not fail her boss, or this team not failing their boss. So how do you draw this thin line between just being indifferent and settling for, okay, we don't know how to do it, or I'm okay, it's fine if I don't reach a solution for the 6 months?
Well, what I suppose subtly hearing in what you're saying is that indifference is somehow bad. Well, it is and it isn't. It looks to me actually more risky to be too caught up. Because if I'm too caught up in my head, I'm somehow taking responsibility for everything on my shoulders. And look, I'm not in control. I don't get to control what's going to happen in life. And sometimes stuff is going to happen in life that I don't like. Right? So if now I suddenly put myself in control of something that I'm not in control of, and I take responsibility for something that at the end of the day I'm not in charge of, I'm not responsible for, I'm actually now more likely to place myself in a more risky place, which is what the IT consultants were doing that day. Oh my God, if we don't solve it, we're in deep trouble. Well, the fact of the matter is sometimes we don't succeed. Sometimes we don't solve the problem. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. But we only see that when we connect the dots backward. But if we place all our ounce of well-being on success, well, that's like saying it should always be a sunny day. That's like saying I should be always happy. Actually, life doesn't work that way. We have day and night. We have happiness and sadness. We have left and right, up and down. So if we start saying one is better than the other, we're now putting ourselves in a place of preference, which is actually going to block us from being in our most creative place. Does that make sense? Yeah? Right.
If I haven't reached that realization, my default might be
I know.
for
Yeah. Yeah, so my job today is to open you to the possibility that it works different to how you think. And then if you wanted to, in whatever way you chose to, you could look in that direction, right? But the direction is, as I come back from the talk, it's to realize that actually fundamentally we're okay. So whether or not I solve the problem, I'm okay. That isn't actually the place where I am saying, oh yeah, whatever. It's like, actually, no, I'm now entering this space of options, of creativity, of potential, of newness and freshness. That's going to be the thing that drives performance, not old thinking. Thanks for the clarification. Somebody here? Yeah.
Time period in my life, I have a lot of time to spend with myself, with my friends, with my family, but I find it very difficult to play sports.
Okay.
The last time I played sports, I was 38 years old. I played for 3 months. I was running for 40 minutes on the treadmill, and I was playing on the gym. I was swimming, I was making sauna, and I stopped suddenly. And I can never make myself come back to this default, or wearing my shoes, wearing my training, going to the gym and playing sports for 2 hours a day, which I have a lot of time. I can do it in the morning and I can do it in the evening. So I can never put myself in this default phase again. And I'm gaining weight and my back is hurting, and I don't know how to put how can I coach myself to go back and play sports again and be a sports guy. Play two hours of sports a day is not a big deal, but I'm too lazy to do it. And how can I manage to do this with life coach? And if I go to a life coach, can he guide me through this?
Here's how I'll answer that. We spend a lot of time making up how we should be. And there's no shortage of noise in the world that is telling us you'll be okay when, right? So what I heard in what you just said there is that you're making up that there's a way that you should be, I'm guessing in order to be healthy or something like that. Yeah. So let me answer it slightly differently. I remember there was one of my mentors was a bit like you described yourself to be before. So he was, a runner. He used to do a lot of exercise, and he was very particular about it. And he went and got his blood tested at one point, and they actually said to him he wasn't that healthy. Despite all the effort he was making to be healthy, he wasn't that healthy. And then he learned about what we're talking about here today, and he gained 30 pounds. And he stopped exercising so much. But he went and had his blood checked, and he was more healthy than he'd ever been in his life. Now, we do this. We're making up that there's some fixed form that we should be in order to be okay all the time. And that noise drives us crazy. And in terms of actual physical health, and this is why I brought this topic here, actually, health is a byproduct of us realizing we're okay. And actually, a lot of the stuff that you see, particularly when I go to the US, I know, sorry, we're at American university, but when I go to to America, I see this a lot. You turn on the TV and you listen to the adverts, and it's like, oh my God, if you pay attention to those adverts, you'll become a nervous wreck. I've got to have white teeth. I need a new Mercedes. I need to lose 30 pounds. I need a new nose. Oh my God, quick. You'll drive yourself nuts because you'll spin this up. Now, in terms of motivation, which I think is part of what you're talking about, life has its own natural motivation.
It comes, Bardo, I stopped, and I was a champion when I was in the 20s.
Yeah.
I stopped playing sports. I play sports different period. It comes once I wake up in the morning and I'm playing sports for 3 months. When it will come? Why it comes so suddenly, and why it goes, and why I don't understand. Why?
But that's the thing, though, isn't it? Is that we place ourselves in charge of managing how we should be, and we're doing that because we think that if we do that, we'll be okay. Now, what I'm pointing you to is actually, if you can start to recognize that you are okay, and that the only thing that's going on is that you have habitual thinking about beating yourselves up about sport.
But I'm gaining weight and my back is hurting, and I'm gaining a lot of weight. Yeah, I'm like overweight by 40 kilos.
Mm-hmm.
I need to lose at least 10 kilos or 15 kilos to be healthy.
You got time to come over and chat with me afterwards? Can we have a
Okay.
quick chat? Okay. Thank you. In this? Yeah. I know.
What happens to expanding yourself and your skills? Do you throw this out the window?
So by skills you mean learning knowledge?
Let's say both skills and capabilities. Skills is, like things you know how to do, like
Yeah.
sports is
Yeah, so actually building on that a little bit from the previous question, like, again, I had an experience, right, when I was doing this apprenticeship in 2014. I suddenly woke up and realized I was fine. Now, I don't live there all the time. I don't want you thinking that that's true. It's not. But I suddenly realized, oh, I'm really fine. I don't have to get anywhere to be okay. Now, I genuinely thought I wasn't going to get up in the morning. I thought I wouldn't shower. I thought I wouldn't work. I thought I wouldn't feed my kids. Apparently that's not true. Apparently life still got me up. Apparently I still did things. Apparently I did them a lot more effectively. And this was a surprise to me, because I had always thought that in order to achieve, I had to be applying pressure on myself to make stuff happen. Well, no. Life has its own movement. So we think we're running it, but actually we're not. We are moved by life, by this deeper intelligence, by this deeper self that we are. It comes through us. And often I find myself now, even when I'm feeling unmotivated, I end up doing things I'm thinking, I'm really unmotivated to do this, but I'm doing it. How does that work? Well, when life wants something to happen, it's like you either let go or get dragged. You'll still be moved to learn stuff. I mean, when I did my study, my research paper for CFS, and the idea came into my head, it was October last year, and I was like, do I really have the time for this? You know, I had a really busy practice. I was doing teaching and all kinds of stuff, and I was like, I don't have the time to work with 25 people and do this off my own back. But I literally watched myself taking action and doing things and getting stuff done. I'm like, how am I going to solve all of this? And I'm like, but when life wants something to happen, you can't stop it. In the same way, you might wake up in the night and feel like you need the toilet. Well, you might not be motivated to get up, but you probably haven't wet yourself in a while. You'll still learn if there's stuff to be learned, and you can't help yourself. And that's the relief. That's why I can do things like this now. Because actually, it used to feel like it was on me. And actually, now I know it's not. Now I know life lives me, I don't live it. So I get used as the conduit. And I'm much more likely to let myself be used as the conduit if I realize that my well-being and safety is never lost. That lets me be in this place where the box is not there so much, where there's more potential, where you see more in the present moment. Does that make sense? Yeah? Thank you. Over here? Yeah?
So, again, the topic is really interesting, but for very special reasons, which is that I coincidentally experienced a lot of what you said. Into more content. I had a long career mostly in economics, finance, which is very structured and a very structured and in a way controlled and predictable space. All of a sudden, over the last 4 to 5 years, I've been exposed to very high quality coaching, professional coaching, change management coaching, in a way that I managed to transform a team of mine of 20 plus members into a completely different space in just a few years. For that, I was selected to kind of take a change management role, which is accountable for change management and transformation in a huge organization. And now I'm facing actually a dilemma, which is maybe building on the few questions in the front here. How do you manage yourself and kind of the expectations around you during this phase of settling in for the change? So how do you assure others, and this is something that definitely I'm expected to do, but I'd be lying to say that this is my only dilemma. How do I assure myself that I'm doing the right thing at the right time if I have to give the people or the target organization a bit of time to settle in for themselves and to find the right balance, or where they can actually make the change or transform to new ways of working, to new habits and new behaviors? How do you give yourself, before anyone else, but also everyone else, the comfort that the right thing is being done if this kind of change is going to take some time and it actually requires some patience and some kind of space? Well, it's the change. I know that it doesn't have a definition, and I believe actually it doesn't have a definition, but it's the change. It's the improvement in general. It's the, I mean, in my professional context, it's the faster delivery. It's the more efficient kind of ways of working and processes and that sort of stuff. And again, I believe 150% that it's not about the tools, it's not about the ways or the instructions that you give to others, but it's about, I mean, the recognition that there is somewhere better that we could be in, and then giving ourselves the space to utilize the energy instead of battling or fighting the battles that we have day to day, to looking for this new place and finding the right way for us to get through. So I know all about it. I know what it takes in terms of patience and time and kind of, I would say, permissiveness to others to kind of settle in the way they do, not the way they want them to do. But again, it's, I mean, in a professional context, you'd like to give others and yourself some assurance in the meantime as well.
Okay, so if I was to ask, are working? This one doesn't work. So if I was to ask you to sum up everything you just said as one question, what would that question be?
How would you measure the change as it happens in the transformation, the change in behavior, the change in the way you work? How would you measure it as it happens? It's not about bottom line numbers. It's not about KPIs or kind of a few reference numbers that you want to move from point X to point Y.
Yeah.
It's just about the change in the way we do business.
Okay, so I can tell you how I measure change with my clients. And for me, it's about, are they getting quieter or noisier? So if my clients are getting quieter, they're starting to touch truth. If they're not, they're getting busier and they're moving further away. And my job is to help point them towards the quiet. My job is to help them see what gets in the way of them being there more. Because I know that that quiet is the source of everything. It's the source of their resilience in the midst of change. It's the source of creativity for when problems arise during change. It's the source of knowing what the right decision is in the moment when there's a decision to be made. That's my measure of it. And the degree to which I can facilitate that is the degree to which I see truth around where the quiet is with everybody I work with. Now, sometimes I can do it, and sometimes I know that I can't. That's why when I first work with someone, or when I'm interviewing, working with somebody, the first thing I look for, honestly, is, does this person look broken or fine to me? If they look fine to me, then I can help them. If they look broken, then I'll come from a place of judgment, and everything I do will probably make them noisier. Does that help? Thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. The first question is, if society ask you, you said we have to accept ourselves, but what if society asked me to be someone else? Like in an evaluation session at work, they tell me you're too sensitive, you shouldn't be, you have to grow thick skin. So I have to be someone, you said I have to accept myself, but at the same time, my work, my job, I work in IT as well, by the way, it asked me to be someone else. So I don't know how to really how to manage this. Then maybe I should be someone else. Maybe I shouldn't accept myself as I am. I don't know. But this is what I am being told in my evaluation interviews. I mean, in my evaluation sessions. And the second thing, when you talk about anxiety, and do you believe in antidepressants and that it could be chemical as well? I can't get quiet unless I take medication, for instance, for some people. What would you say about this?
Yeah. I'll address the second one first. So I have taken medication like that. I don't take anything now. I'm not going to say it's wrong or right. I think it's different for everybody. I think if you can touch someone, you know, from that deeper place, it can have a huge effect on them getting quiet without them having to take medication. But there are some times when it might be right to give someone something and they get quieter so you can have a conversation with them. So I'm not going to say it's wrong or right. You know, one of the things that happens when people come and see me with depression, anxiety, and they'll say, well, what do I do about my medication? How do I come off? I'm just like, just leave it alone. Right? Just don't even think about it. Right? Because there's something so right in all of us that it can deal with what's wrong with us. So even if someone is taking medication and they want to get off it, well, eventually that happens, but it happens organically a lot of the time. You know, I've had clients who've had like thyroid problems and they've taken thyroid hormones and they ask me, oh, well, shall I come off the thyroid? I'm like, just leave it. And then at some point they come on a call with me and they go, I've just stopped taking my thyroid medication. I can't seem to remember to take it anymore. And they just organically stop. So again, we can make up it's a problem that we take medicine or whatever else, but again, it's not a problem until, you know, unless we're making it one, right? Because actually that's going to make us busier. It's going to actually add more fuel to the fire. I don't know, does that answer that? Yeah. And then in terms of society and the pressure, I mean, look, I get it. I'm half Egyptian, so I've had some of that in my life. And honestly, it did get to a stage where I started to see that other people's judgments about me represent just their thinking about them. It's not information about me. And the more I've seen that that's true, often they're innocently sharing what they think I need to do to be okay from their misunderstanding about how well-being works. Again, it's innocent. It's not malicious. But the more I've seen my own truth around that, the less inclined I am to take other people's thinking about me so seriously. Now, does that mean that sometimes life changes? Yes. Does that mean that sometimes I lose approval of people? Yep. That's why it's really good for me to be able to see that my resilience and well-being has nothing to do with other people's approval. Although in the moment it might feel like it does when my thinking gets kicked off. You know, I used to get, I'll share this, I used to get correctional emails from a particular member of my family who used to tell me what I was doing wrong with my life and what I needed to be doing to get it right. And it was very well-meaning. But here's what used to happen. I'd get those emails. I'd drive myself crazy about the fact that I was obviously doing life really badly. I'd then try and fix it. And I'd try and create something, or let me try and do something to be a success. And usually I wouldn't make anything out of that, because if there's no energy from life for something to happen, it doesn't matter how much you struggle to try and change it, it doesn't happen. So I then feel even more of a failure. because I'd not managed to create anything. It's like, oh yeah, he must be right, I must be a complete mess up. Now, one day I got one of these messages, and it was quite a tough one. And I sent it to my coach at the time, Michael, and I said, help. What do I do with this? And he wrote back to me and he said, well, it looks to me like someone has just got a red hot poker, a stick, shoved it in an area of your mind and done that. And he said, the extent to which you can see that that's all it is the extent to which it'll settle down and you'll be fine again. And he said, the extent to which you think that's information about your life is the extent to which you're going to struggle, suffer, and probably not create very much from it. Now, that day when he said that to me, I suddenly realized, oh, okay, so the problem is not him. The problem is not what this person is saying about me. The problem is that I actually have habitual thinking that's quite similar to what he's writing down on these emails. So the minute he sends me the email, I get lost in my own noise about it and drive myself crazy. Well, once I realized that that's all it was, well, I also realized that what I was feeling would settle too. As my mind settled, there was nothing to do with it. Now, I have a great relationship with that person now. It's fine. We don't talk about what I do particularly. But, you know, we found a way of being in relationship to one another. But I have had periods where that sort of stuff happens and I've gone my separate way. Sometimes that's just how it works. You do something, I've done something different. Or, you know, I'm not friends with someone anymore. Not out of hatred or anger, but just because, hey, this is there. It won't work. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, I think it's more.
Yay, it works.
Yes, I think it's more because when they say this about me, I know that I'm sensitive. I know everything.
You feel it, right?
So all what you said is actually it's my opinion already. But,
That's it.
So
Yeah,
she doesn't
exactly.
need to say anything.
I was
because
my worst critic. So
Yeah,
if
it's
someone
true.
would send me something that looked like criticism, it's like, oh God,
Yes.
I'm already doing it to myself. I don't need anybody else to do it. So yeah, I'm the same. So I
And
really
it's
feel it.
already because I have an opinion that sensitive people can't work in IT. So she doesn't need to say anything. I already have a preconception.
You have
in my
all
head.
that going.
Yeah, so it's.
So your
You're right.
resilience is about realizing that, hey, you're going to feel that stuff. But if you know that that stuff is not information about you, and if you also know the nature of it, which is that our feelings always settle when we're not messing with them, when we can see that they're safe to experience. And they are safe to experience because they aren't information about your life. They're just information about thought in the moment. Does that make sense?
So you mean just letting go? I mean just
Yeah.
not thinking about
Well,
fixing it or changing yourself?
yeah, so the
Maybe.
letting go bit is something that happens with understanding. It's not a practice. So
Mm.
when someone says something about me, do I feel it? Absolutely. I do. Do I know that it's fine and safe for me to feel that? Yes. Do I know that the nature of that feeling is that it sorts itself out? Yes. So when I feel it and when it happens, I just don't care. It's like, okay, fine, I'm annoyed, I'm upset. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understood. How you
Can I say something with the, I have a loud voice. But
Okay.
there is a risk embedded in what you're trying to say, which I totally understand, and I can believe.
And I can relate quite well with it. Let's say that someone is working in a corporation and he or she has such an aggressive attitude in getting things done. And this is how people perceive that person to be. He's an aggressive person. And the person knows that he's aggressive. He thinks that this is how he should be in order to get things done. Now his bosses, his peers, his superiors, whoever, are telling him that you are aggressive, you're being perceived as aggressive, and you need to change. If that person is at a quiet space with himself that, yes, I am aggressive, I know I am aggressive, I'm convinced that I should be aggressive in getting things done, and he will let these feelings settle down, as you said, there will be no trigger for him to change into an approachable person. And so there is a risk in what you're saying is that there is, and that's what Nada was trying to say, is that there is a fine line between accepting yourself as you are with your faults and not trying to change or to improve to be better, and hearing the vibes from the external environment and working on them because you know that you're aggressive and you need to change. And I think this is where the trap might be.
So I didn't say that you shouldn't try and do something about it. So, but there's a really big difference between coming at someone trying to help them change from a space of judgment and coming at someone trying to help them change from a space of love. Yeah, so if you, you know, if you try and change someone from a space of judgment, and that's why I say when I first work with somebody, I'm looking to see, do I see their health? Not do I see their faults? Because if I see their faults, I'm coming from a feeling of judgment, the coaching's going nowhere. All that's going to happen is I'm going to fight with them, try and make them different, they're going to pick up on my judgment, and it won't work. So first, I have to be able to understand and see their humanness and see, you know, yeah, and you already hear it on some level. I mean, you can see that this person thinks this is valuable to them. So it's not even about you. Their aggression is not about you. So that's a really healthy place to approach that conversation and see if someone's willing to see something new about it. Now, sometimes you'll get lucky and they'll say yes. Sometimes they won't. And if they won't, then you make your decision. But I'm not saying you just go, oh yeah, it's all fine, don't do anything about it. What I am saying is that when we realize we're fine, this deeper wisdom within us still knows what to do with these things. And the feeling that we come from is everything in that sort of situation. Does that make sense? Sorry? Yeah, well, I did have someone, but he was open. So I had someone when I was coaching in Amsterdam the other week, and you know, I was reading, he'd done a 360, you know 360? He'd done a 360, and I was reading through his results on there, and there was so much comments about shouting and aggression, and you could see he was a bit worried about coming into the coaching session with me, because I think he thought I was going to, you know, get on his back, basically. And I was just like, and I wasn't, because I was like, look, I know what it's like to yell and get annoyed. I'm human too. So I just got curious with him about it. And I really listened to him. And oh my God, this guy was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was desperate to get somewhere. And he was terrified if he didn't, that it was going to affect his family, his kids, his mortgage. There was so much riding on it. And you could see that this was then coming into the workplace. So it's like, if I don't do all this and they don't do what they're supposed to do, we're in trouble, and I'm in trouble. So my work with him was to help him see something about that. Actually, you're not as in trouble as you think. You might think you're in a lot of trouble, but actually your safety's built into you. And look, I did one session with him. Where's it going to go? I don't know, but he was receptive to it. And he was receptive because I didn't get on his back. No. And I didn't judge him because I'm human too. I'm subject to that stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah. Lots. Who was first? I didn't see. Does that mic work or?
Yeah.
It does? Oh, okay. Oh, we'll have another one.
Thank you, John.
No.
It's really very inspiring and you're showing us the other side of the coin, our competitive life. But in this competitive, stressful life, how can we establish the balance? You told us what to do, but what's the path to reach this stage?
What's the path to, say that again?
To reach this stage. To leave the stress and the competitive life and to know that you don't have anything, you cannot manage everything and you have to let go. How?
Yeah.
How can we
Well,
work
look,
on ourselves?
I live in a competitive life. I work in one. You know, I've not left it, but I am okay, much more than I ever was. And there's something about when you realize you're okay on the inside and you can see what's really blocking you from seeing it, that actually lets you play the game, right? Like I said, I would never have done this sort of thing before. But actually, look, what's the worst that's going to happen? I mess up, I feel bad for a bit, and I get over it. Okay, I can handle that. So the more we can begin to look in the direction of where our well-being is, and that's what I'm doing with this talk. I'm pointing you towards where it is. And if there's some part of you that's intrigued by it, then keep looking there. Because the more you keep looking towards it, the more you'll see of it. And the more you see of it, the more you find yourself able to play the game, and you realize that you're not really playing with your own money. You're not playing the game, you know, with anything on it. Because ultimately the thing that you thought was on it is never lost. It's always there. That's what lets me do things like this now. Does that make sense? Great.
So, John, thank
Yes.
you for the very interesting talk. I remember your first part of the session, you said that you're going to make us maybe a bit curious about some points. You
Can I do
managed to
that?
do it right, yes?
Okay, good.
But maybe that's not really helpful. So, coming from research, I always try to generalize any kind of theory of discussion. However, I'm failing to generalize what you have been telling to us, because basically we are human, we are different, and not all of us have the same kind of sense of responsibility. So as a parent, as a businessman, we wear a lot of hats in life. I always tell my kids how to enjoy life, have fun, and always be responsible.
Yeah.
Feeling that you are fine and being quiet, some people might perceive that you're gonna settle with what you have. This might be really fulfilling to other people who have really high targets in business, life, and health. I want to feel healthy. I want to lose weight. I want to gain an investment of X%. I want to reach my PhD at the age of 40.
Yeah.
I'm struggling on how can I implement or live what you've been telling us with a very high sense of responsibility. This can be really, can guide me there. However, other people, by nature, they are not that responsible. So they are always trying to find a way to, it's fine, I'm good, alhamdulillah, let's move on. So how can I generalize this? How can I deal with both sides? People who are really having high sense of responsibility, and others who are trying to find a safe haven, living the day by day, and let's have fun, let's enjoy what we are doing, and it is what it is.
So is there something there about how do I motivate other people who...
Something like this. And even yourself.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about other people. I'm talking about my own self. Maybe I'm already responsible, so when I adopt that kind of thinking and how to live in peace and how you feel you're okay, it's okay. However, if I'm not that responsible, if I'm not that organized, if I'm not that in peace with my own self, then I will find this kind of feeling satisfying and relaxing. I will not be achieving what I want to achieve.
Sure. Because I believe that satisfaction does not contradict with ambition at all. Your self-realization, where you are, where you're standing, what you have, what you're blessed with, you should appreciate what you have and use these tools, your talents, the things that you are really good at, for moving on. It should be your motive. We are now living in a VUCA world, a very changing world, a very fast one. If you just stay where you are, you will be lost. You will not be there.
That's it.
You live in the past. So this is self-realization, that what I have is very good for now. If I stay where I am, I will not, without having an ambition in the future, I'll be lost in the world.
Yeah. So that's why I was telling John that maybe the other part of the discussion should talk more about motivation and target setting and moving on, I mean.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, is this stopped again? No. So, I used to do lots of motivational stuff. Like all the stuff that was tools and technique based was about pumping myself up, being motivated, setting goals. I mean, look, there was one point in my life where I had a goal for everything in my life. There was nothing that was untouched. Emotional, financial, spiritual, you know, relationships, you name it, I had a goal for it. And one morning I woke up and I was really miserable. And I was like, why am I miserable? And I looked at this list of goals and I was like, well, why do I have all these goals? And the answer that came back to me was, oh, you think you're going to be happy when you've created all of this stuff. And then I thought, but hang on a minute, I've now deferred my happiness to this point in the future which I might never create. So all of a sudden, half of those goals stopped making sense and I just dumped them. Now what was interesting was I still kept doing stuff. And stuff still came through me and I still was moved to do it. And we've got it hooked up in our head that we have to somehow feel pressured to create results. That doesn't work that way. We are naturally moved by life to do things. Now, it is true that some people are more moved to do things than others. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. In the same way, a small tree is not worse than a big tree. They're both trees. They're both expressions of life. Now, what I can also observe is, if you want to motivate other people, people get inspired by where you live in yourself. Right? People get inspired by just me being and me sharing and me being on my own journey. You know, there's the old saying, I don't know if you remember the story or know the story about Mahatma Gandhi. And a woman came to him wanting him to help her stop her kid from eating sweets. And she took her son there and she said, you know, can you help me? What can you do? And he said, come back to me in a week. So she goes away, and she lived a long way as well. So she went back, and then a week later she came back to him. Said, so, you know, he said, come back in a week. Can you help me? And he looked at the kid and he said, stop eating sweets. And she said, is that it? And he said, well, last week I was still eating sweets. This week I've stopped. So there's something about being the change. So if you want to wake people up, you first wake yourself up. You first find your own freedom. You first find your own motivation. Then people start to get curious. It's like, I don't know if you've ever been to London or been to a show, right? But when you go to a West End show in London, you see at the end people do a standing ovation. There's always the first person that stands up. When that person stands up, everyone else is looking, going, God, do I stand up? And I might be embarrassed. And then the next person stands up. Then the person after that. And before you know it, the whole room is standing up. So it's not so much about how you sort them out. It's about going there yourself. And then the more you connect to that energy, you don't even have to do that much. But it exudes, because secretly everybody wants to wake up to it. And if they see you living in it, some of them start getting curious. I don't know, does that make sense? Thanks for the question. You got a mic still? Yeah. Sorry.
Life is about money. Yani, we all worry about money. All our life evolves around money. From
Going to go up here.
From where we're, from the beginning of when we were kids until now, all we worry about is money. When we don't have money, and when we have money. When we have money, where to invest it? When we don't have money, what to do? So how can we stop worrying about money?
Look, I'm not going to lie to you. Do I worry about money? Yeah. I don't actually know anyone that doesn't. Here's what I see as changed. Yes, I worry about it, but my relationship to that worry is a bit different.
It's a daily process.
Yeah. Yeah. I have it too, you know. I'm just going to sit down for a minute. So all I can say to you is that whilst it's still there in me, because I've actually started to see that whether or not I have it, the possibility exists, the potential exists for me to be okay, it means that I worry about it less than I used to. Now that doesn't mean the thoughts aren't there.
When you have it, Bob, you worry where to invest it, if the banks are safe, if the country is safe. It's a big hassle.
Right, but tied up.
And if you have a family,
Yep,
where to spend the money,
yep.
and yeah, it's a big problem that you have to solve every day.
I hear you. Now, for me, the answer is not going to come from worrying about it. The answer as to what to do is going to come from that knowingness. Now, that for me is, it's worth saying a bit about what it looks like. So, when you think about how we make decisions, how does that happen? You know, here's what it looks like to me. Imagine if you rephrased what your question was about money and said, John, I worry all the time about what time I'm going to go to the toilet. Right? Well, you could worry about it a lot. You could make up a time that you should go to the toilet. You might even get yourself to the toilet at that time. But if there was something, if there was no energy from life for something to happen in that moment, you're not going to really do much. Now, the reason you don't sit there and worry about going to the bathroom is because there's a part of you that knows what to do. Now, that knowingness is always there. I'm sure you've had lots of experiences in your life where you've worried about something over and over and over, and then at some point you've just gone, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I'll do that, you know, that knowingness kicks in. Well, that applies here. It's just, it looks more urgent to you because there's, from what I hear, from what you've said, there's a lot more riding on it. Now, I have that too. When it comes to money, I'm not going to lie to you. You know, I worry about kids. I worry about family. I worry about all those things. I know it's a bit different over here, but I still have it. But ultimately, I know that whether or not I solve it or find a solution, the potential exists for me to be okay, as it does with my children. And also knowing that my best decision is not going to come from that place of worry. It's going to come from that place that tells me when to go to the loo, that brings me a fresh insight when I'm not thinking about it. That means that when the worrying thoughts come in, yes, I feel them, but I feel less inclined to do something with them. Does that make sense?
I think also money is involved in everything we have in our life.
Sorry, yeah.
Money is involved in everything. It's a tool that's for everything for us, for our kids, for education, for eating, for drinking, for anything. So that's why it's a daily routine.
Yeah.
That's why we're thinking about it. We're not thinking about the money. Behave with it. What is the problem? Yes, we're not thinking about the money itself. We're thinking we need the money for how to spend it. But we are not thinking about the money. We're thinking about the education.
As life coach, does he have to manage your money? Does he have to do
What's your rate, basically? Huh?
Does my coach? Is that? No. So, well, look, life coaches out there, there are some. This is not life coaching. So this is breakthrough coaching. So the way I work is I share with people how stuff works. They then find their own. I mean, there are people who will do that, but whether somebody else's plan will work for you. I mean, you know, there was a great book about this called, I think it's Click Moments. I don't know, you might want to look it up on Amazon. And it was a book about the randomness of success. And the book is great for the stories it shares. It's not so great for the strategies. But the stories it shares talk about how these great things that you would think were the result of meticulous planning and strategy, how they got, you know, created as a result of chance encounters between people and people having random insights. And what was interesting about the book was it then started to talk about how people tried to reverse engineer what they thought had happened to create those results, and they never managed to recreate them. Right, because it was basically saying that success is something that comes through us. Our ability to manage life is something that comes through us. No, it was random. It was random. Sorry, May.
Sorry, we are just running out of time. So, what? 2 more questions? Okay.
There's a lot of.
Actually, I'm just going to share something. The quiet you're talking about, maybe for me, I've named it something else, and it might help others understand it, maybe. And I just call it the trust. Once you get to the point where you trust, you're fine no matter what. And actually, the revolution was a revolutionary for me, because at one point I found bullets outside my house, and I found out that I'm fine. And that was so big for me, because an hour before I was telling my husband, we have to evacuate. We've got to get our kids out, this is not going to work. And he was very calm, but then I actually slept with the bullets. And from that day, things became like I'm trusting at the quiet, that I'm safe, whether I have money, whether I do all the shoulds, I'm hearing a lot of shoulds, whether I am thin, I'm fat, I have a fantastic, successful career, or I don't. In the end, I'm here on earth, and in reality, I'm fine. And I will be till the end. And I think that's what you keep hitting at, and I'm happy to hear it again. It just get to that point where you trust, you're safe.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, that space, we think it's outside. Oh, it's in my money, it's in the situation, it's in what the government's doing, it's in my bank account, it's in my relationship. No, the safety is inside. That's what you touched, that's what Mara touched, it's what I touched when I was sick. It's the silence before thought. And the only thing that's stopping us seeing it is all of this stuff that we get lost in our head that creates the very real illusion that our safety has something to do with what's going on outside. It doesn't. And look, at the end of the day, you don't get to control if there are bullets flying past your head. You don't. You know, and that's why to derive our sense of safety from what's going on outside is always doomed to failure, because we don't get to control that, and it's always changing. There's a need to look underneath our experience to see more of who we are at our nature, at our core. And that's where our real safety is. Now, the journey I'm on with people is about pointing people to see more of that, because it also happens to be the source of unlocking their potential in whatever the challenge is. You know, whatever the challenge may be, it isn't going to be harmed. In fact, it's going to be solved if they can realize they're fine whether or not they solve it, whether or not they fix it. That leaves them in that open space of potential. Beautiful share, thank you. Go on, May, why don't you finish this off?
Okay, I just wanted to share my experience with John, because I've been working with John for a while now, and he's been helping me a lot with a lot of issues I've had on a personal level and on a professional level and with my children and everything. And before I met John, I had seen psychiatrists, I've gone on medication, I've spoken to life coaches, I looked for tools, for manuals to help me manage my life better. And I was always looking for a prescription. I wanted someone to tell me what to do with my life and encourage me to do it, because that to me was where safety was. And then after I met John and we had our conversations, I must say I was very resistant at the beginning. Because yeah, that sounds really cool, very theoretical though, John. And when I'm back home and I'm faced with the kids, my husband, my job, Egypt, the driving, the insecurity, all that goes away. I want to take back home something that I can follow and make sure I'm on track. He was very patient, and you know, I spent 3 days in an intensive course with him, so we had enough time to really knock on what he's trying to share with you today in 1 hour. But what I found was, when I came back home, was that quietness he's talking about, I really felt quiet. I really wasn't living in my head looking for answers and manuals and tips and tricks to make things work. I was really quiet. And when I got to that quiet, everything seemed to be more smooth. And I mean everything. At work, at home, even with my kids. My child, she's doing her IG, and she's a very anxious person. My sister would tell you, she's very anxious, and she panics, and she tries her best, and she's always on the go, and she's crying and stressing out. And I had that talk with her one day when she was breaking down. Mom, what am I going to do? I'm running out of time. There's so much to do. The syllabus is too long. I'm required to do this and this and that. And then I shared that concept with John, that John shared with me. And I said, Nano, you're really living in your head, and you're wasting a lot of your energy and a lot of your time worrying about how to get those A stars. And if you just stop the thinking, I'm not telling her stop the studying. I'm not saying stop worrying or stop trying to excel at work, or I was just asking her to stop worrying and thinking about what to do to get the A stars and just get it done. Live that moment. And she has witnessed going up with her grades in maths and physics, the most challenging courses she's been, working on. And she's actually gotten the highest score in physics, second highest in math. And that to her is an accomplishment because she was at the 60s and 70s. And now we're looking at 80s and 90s. And that's simply because she stopped worrying and looking for, Mommy, we need to plan every day. What am I going to start with? What am I going to do? And when am I going to do my community service? And when am I going to do my skill thing? And she just stopped that. But she didn't stop working. So a lot of us I know in this room, because I know we're conditioned in our society to look for manuals and look for a way to do things. And I know as an Egyptian living in Egypt with all the stresses and ambiguities that we have to live through, there is a lot going on in our heads. And I know we're all looking for these answers. But I also know that's not what John is going to offer you. John makes you see things differently. He really helps you learn to trust yourself, your spirit, and that life will find its way around the minute you stop worrying about it. And it's not giving up, and it's not being passive. It's more about trusting yourself and trusting that it's a bit like, when you trust yourself, things happen the way they're meant to happen. When we get stuck with our heads in our heads, we force it to go in a direction that might not really be the right direction. And then it drains us, and it drains our health, and it drains our relationships, and it just wastes our energy. So I hope whatever I've said has helped connect you to, where this is all going from. And thank you, John, very much.
Thank you, Mai, so much for
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.